Justin Trudeau, as you well know, Dan, has afforded all of these economic migrants the option of where they want to go. So all of them have heard of Toronto, so they're all heading here. No more. When I become mayor, they're all going back. What we're going to do is we are going to evacuate every last illegal migrant from our shelter system, our hotels and motels, and we're going to bus them to this closest jurisdiction that wants them. And if nobody wants them, well, then we're going to be busing them to the front lawn of the official residence of our Prime Minister.
This is Dan Dix here reporting for Press for Truth. Today is Friday, August 24th, 2018, and we got a great show lined up for you, so let's just jump right into it. Joining me on the line today is Faith Goldy. She is a political commentator, an independent journalist turned mayoral candidate, as she just announced she's going to be running against John Tory in the upcoming election to be the new mayor of Toronto. So Faith, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Now, I obviously want to talk about the campaign and your plans to make Toronto a better place. But before we get into that, there's so many things going on with you lately. You've had various events that you've had shut down by these Antifa thugs who apparently don't believe in any kind of free speech. You have had these tech companies kind of colluding against you in the sense that I would amount it to financial terrorism with PayPal and Patreon shutting down your accounts. So I want to get into where do you think this is all stemming from and where it's going to go. But maybe we could start with this. Justin Trudeau made the famous statement, maybe now infamous, diversity is our strength. Now, is there some truth to that? Or is this more of like a doublespeak, kind of something straight out of George Orwell's 1984 type of a statement?
Well, here, first of all, I want to begin by saying thanks so much for having me on, Dan. When I told folks that I was coming on to Press for Truth, I had a lot of people who were very excited. You guys are doing a great thing there. You know, you started off as an independent outlet, and last time I checked, I think you got 183,000 YouTube subs, which just speaks to the growth of alternative media, which is exactly why many alternative media outlets are facing, as you put it in a previous video, this sort of internet book burning that's occurring by the forces of oppression that surround us, who are so afraid of those of us who tilt at windmills and speak common sense and power to truth, or truth to power rather, that they have to shut us down because their arguments are not strong enough to just debate us. Now, as for the diversity is our strength mantra that we hear perpetually repeated among the ruling liberal class, here I would defer to the sentiments of Maxime Bernier, and I liked actually his branding of it as liberal multiculturalism, because it is what we've seen play out in Canada, a very unusual type of multiculturalism wherein there is no cohesive identity that seems to be celebrated. It's everyone's differences that we celebrate, and absolutely nothing that brings us together, which includes our history, our heritage, the documents that make us so great, including our Constitution. There's some debate about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. There are good parts and some parts that are perhaps a slippery slope. And you don't see any of that common heritage being celebrated. This new, basically, day of apology that we have now instituted into our national calendar book. This is not the sort of stuff that builds a nation. It's the sort of stuff that indeed tears us apart. And I think that you're seeing that among people. And this is among people that I'm meeting on the streets of various ethnic backgrounds who don't like it either. They say, yeah, okay, we've got Tamil Fest. Okay, yeah, we've got these Chinese New Year celebrations, but our families came to Canada because we love Canada. We love what Canada stands for. And that's, peace, order, good governance, the rule of law, that all are equal before it. That not that some are more equal because they're perhaps more exotic or more different. And liberal multiculturalism has led us to a place where I don't want to say weaknesses, but differences are what is exalted and what is seen to make someone better, as opposed to the things that unify us. And even in the way that our cities, some of our most diverse cities, are structured, we don't see true multiculturalism that is a hybrid society. We see camps of self-quarantine, these multicultural enclaves, and really a honeycomb society. And so I think that there is certainly a growing tide in this country, Dan, for folks who want to see things as they once were, which is unity being our strength, not just differences.
Well, it looks like at this stage in the game, the public support for immigration is kind of starting to sway, and this perhaps is because of what's happening in Quebec. I mean, a lot of people are seeing the open border essentially at Roxham Road. I think we're upwards of 600 or so people crossing daily at this point. So perhaps, what do you think about the current state of, I suppose you could say, the mentality of Canadians when it comes to accepting people? And is there room for, let's say, maybe the private sector to kind of take up the reins here in where the government has failed? Maybe we could have certain private churches sponsoring people. What are your views on the private sector versus the public when it comes to immigration policies?
Well, certainly. So I do know that there was a recent poll that was conducted that I think it was about 49% of Canadians polled, so that they were interested in seeing less immigration as opposed to more. And this strikes a lot of Canadians as being inherently un-Canadian, because we're constantly told that we are a nation of immigrants, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that the growing anti-immigrant, if you will, sentiment, some of which is, by the way, very much widely held within new Canadian populaces, can be largely blamed on the Liberal government of Canada's approach to immigration. We have had for decades now a very, very sophisticated model for immigration, one that has been attempted to be emulated around the world. Our point system, where we looked at immigrants of high social capital, high academic capital, people who could speak at least one of the official languages, etc. People who were easy to assimilate into a nation that knew about its own identity. Now, as Canadians, new and old, are facing this identity crisis. We don't know what we're asking people to assimilate to, and we're bringing in people without really asking them to assimilate properly. And again, these are sentiments that I'm hearing among new Canadian groups as well. And now, all of a sudden, fast forward to 2017, January thereof, and Justin Trudeau proclaims to the world that everyone's welcome. Point system be damned. Immigration system that is the envy of the world be damned. Just walk across. You'll be detained for less than 24 hours, and within 30 days, you will have the sort of benefits that many Canadians who work hard and spend 40% of their year basically working for the tax man don't even have access to. And so people, like I said, old and new Canadians are mad as hell, and they don't want to take it anymore. Let me tell you this, Dan. When I talk to members of, say, the Toronto Chinese community, and I tell them that I want to evacuate illegal migrants from our shelter systems that were built to take care of our own, they go cuckoo banana cakes over it. They love it because they say, I waited in line. I pay my taxes. I come to this country not for my free gibs, so to speak, but because I want equal opportunity and more opportunity than perhaps was available to me in my semi-communist sort of, hybrid economy country that I came from. And I respect that. And so this is where Justin Trudeau's vision of a so-called post-national state really starts to come apart, because outside of the economic migrants who are coming here and taking us all as fools, no one likes it. Maybe there might be a few bleeding hearts who live in gated communities and don't really care that, just a portion of their millions is going towards helping these, it's a pathological altruism really at its core. But these people are in the minority, and there is a rising tide of people who are unhappy about the status quo. And I think that many of the political opinion makers, if you will, who have said, whoa, this is concerning, I actually am inclined to agree with them. It is concerning. And so that's why I've spent a great deal of my time in my commentary, etc., saying, we got to figure out who we are. We have to get back in touch with what unites us and what makes our country truly great. And that includes our history. Stop ripping down the darn monuments. And that's exactly why I have instituted some of these things into my policy, including a heritage protection program that would see an explicit mandate to preserve those things that unite us and that make us great, because of course, in order to know where we're going, we have to acknowledge where we came from.
Well, yeah, you're getting back to the fundamentals. You're getting back to the basics, and you've been one of the more vocal people speaking out against this, and this has brought on some unwanted attention. I mean, you've essentially been shut down at various events. You had a few speaking engagements at some universities, as I understand it. Why do you think these guys feel the need to come shut you down. There's clearly a misunderstanding. I don't think you're a white supremacist. I don't think you're in favor of fascism. I don't think you're in favor of racism. Why do these guys have it so wrong? Is it the indoctrination from the schools? Are they just completely brainwashed? Why do they have you completely misunderstood?
Right. Well, I will say this. These people that have worked so hard to shut me down from various venues are truly in a very slim minority. But of course, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. They are very loud and organized. And so that's why they are able to accomplish their ends. When it comes to the university populace, I'll tell you very simply, it's like this. There is no more freedom of speech on our university campuses, which is perhaps one of the greatest travesties in this particular season of our civilization. I'd say we're in at least fall, if not approaching winter. It depends if I win this election or not. We might be able to turn things around a little, but no, I jest here. Without freedom of speech within the universities, as John Stuart Mill, the godfather really of liberal democracy, so accurately pointed out, you need this marketplace of ideas. Without a marketplace of ideas, you lend yourself to a predisposition of being able to be brainwashed. Because freedom of speech, well, here's this idea, and there's that idea, and let them all kind of marinate in my brain. What do you get? Well, critical thinking, and then you arrive at a conclusion. These poor children, and honestly, my heart breaks for them. I don't see them as enemies. Don't forget, I was in my youth, and when I was early days of my university schooling, I was a rabid Marxist. And I was actually an Orthodox Jewish boy who started to open up my mind into the arguments of the right. And I'd spend all night long being in the library trying to counter-argue him and did all this stuff. Until finally, it was one particular issue when I arrived at the conclusion, his arguments are better than mine. And so I am now at a crossroads, and it's either I accept just this one concession that, okay, he's right on this, and I move forward and think these things, or I continue to believe what I believe, knowing full well in my heart and in my mind that it is dead dogma, and I have in effect become a dead dogmatist. And so, well, I started, it was the first domino down the path towards right thinking, if you will. So. Unfortunately, a gentleman like that young Orthodox Jewish boy would be very much bullied outside of the classroom today. He would be called, I think, probably a Nazi with a kippah on, right?
Yeah.
It's worked on Ben Shapiro, and Candace Owens is a white supremacist. So anything's fair game these days. So I think really what it comes down to is a lack of freedom of speech on the university campuses has led to a lack of the ability to critically think. And that is a really, really dangerous mixture, because when you don't use this and you can't use this, well, then all you got is this. Mm-hmm. And that is, in fact, what we've seen play out on our streets.
Well, now we're seeing the major tech companies making themselves gods of political opinion. Just within the last few weeks, an example I'd like to point to is the case with Alex Jones. And like him or hate him, regardless of what you think about the man says, there was obvious clear collusion there to silence a certain opinion that they do not want being expressed. And I think something similar has happened with you. So, what can you tell us about this PayPal and Patreon ban? Because that seems very serious to me. I mean, this is how we in the field of independent media fund ourselves, and they've taken away your ability to accept funding. That is major in my view. So what can you tell us about that, and where are you at with that?
Look, this is exactly why I think it's easy to say that we need more innovation and, a control of the means of production, to use the vernacular of the enemy, the communists, of course, on the right. But I think perhaps what would be more poignant or effective would be to see many of these big tech industries essentially legislated as some sort of public utility. This is something I've talked about. I know Steve Bannon brought this up. I know that Trump is tweeting about that they're looking into what they can do. And so what that in effect means in layman's terms is that internet monopolies, guys like Google, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, PayPal, sort of like as a big five as an example, that have monopolies in their given fields, would be regulated as a public utility. So very much as your sewage, your water, et cetera, your hydro. So it doesn't matter what you, Dan, think freely. You can be right wing, you can be left wing, you can think this sort of conspiracy theorist, or you can think nothing at all. Your toilet's still going to flush. Your tap's still going to turn on, right? So I think that it would be, in some ways, prudent to see this sort of legislation be applied to these sorts of organizations, which have more boldly, almost by the day, taken on the role of God. And let's be honest here. I understand that the internet is not a necessity in life, but we live in civilized places where it is becoming increasingly difficult to operate in any sort of profession without having a social media or a public presence, or even, being on YouTube and Google, whatever it is that you do. And so I think it would be very, very cool to see this sort of legislation. And don't forget, this would work for anyone, because if you were on the left and some big old right-wing guys were saying, we don't like what you're saying about Karl Marx, Control-Alt-Delete you wouldn't like it either. So I think that this would be an interesting sort of a protection mechanism to securing all people on all sides of the fence, to ensure that the internet, which is really the new marketplace of ideas, stays as liberal and free as possible. Of course, with some exceptions. There's a parameter to our liberal democracy. If you're arguing for things like violence against an identifiable group, if you're a child, pornographer, or some other vile, disgusting thing, we don't want you here. But if you just think that low taxes are great and that globalism might not be the answer, well, then there's no reason for you to lose your livelihood. That's absurd. And anyone who's cheering it on, anyone at all, ought to understand really the course of history, and at least the past 100 years, that first they come for one group and next they come for you, and I've seen that in my own life where, they've come for others and then they come for me and then they come for me and then they come for, the next group. And so we would all do well to be free speech radicals to a degree, and by which I mean, radical refers to the root. We really want to be the root of free speech, which is that this is a freedom that we should always interpret as expansively as possible, of course, with very, very few limitations.
Yeah, a quote I often like to quote is, if you don't believe in freedom of speech for even those who you despise, then you don't believe in it at all. And that's a really important point to get across moving forward. Now, on that note, moving forward, maybe in closing, we could just talk a little bit about some of your plans to make Toronto a better place. I mean, you're on the campaign trail right now. What are some of the key points moving forward that you think are going to help you get elected as mayor?
That I know are going to, because of course I've been meeting people up at the doors at various city events and even just on the streets, and everyone says the same thing. This is not the city that we remember from even just a few years ago. We've got gun violence up over 167%. We now have a murder rate that tops that of New York City. So one of my marquee platform promise is to make Toronto safe again. And it's not just a cute little catchphrase. We have real ways that we're going to do this, unlike my competition. We're going to bring back TAVIS. TAVIS being this anti-violence strategy that Toronto officers once upon a time were able to employ before our city leaders caved into the very loud minority of special interest groups. So we're going to see things like surge policing when I become mayor, and priority neighborhoods. So we got a lot of shootings, got a lot of gangs going on over here. We're going to see a surge of police officers going on in there. So if you're a gangbanger, you're going to be thinking twice before you start roaming the streets with your drugs and your guns and your knives. We're also going to see a reinstitution of carding. That's where officers say, you know what, buddy, it's 3 a.m. You're hanging out on a street corner. This is a corner where a lot of drug activity happens, a lot of gang recruitment happens. We got to see some ID. Okay, you're not under arrest. We got to know who you are and what you're up to. And we know that when carding occurs, guess what happens? Gangbangers don't feel so inclined to carry their gun around on them willy-nilly, and that's why you don't see the sort of escalation that we've been seeing in recent months of drive-bys by parks where kids are getting sprayed by stray bullets. You don't see this sort of business of massacres on our streets where two young girls, beautiful Canadian girls, have their lives claimed from them. On top of that, of course, circling back to our earlier point of the illegal invasion right now, well, Justin Trudeau, as you well know, Dan, has afforded all of these economic migrants the option of where they want to go. So all of them have heard of Toronto, so they're all heading here. No more. when I become mayor, they're all going back. What we're going to do is we are going to evacuate every last illegal migrant from our shelter system, our hotels and motels, and we're going to bus them to this closest jurisdiction that wants them. And if nobody wants them, well, then we're going to be busing them to the front lawn of the official residence of our prime minister, because of course this was his policy, this was his idea. No one asked Toronto, and so we're done with paying for them and we're done with housing them. And we do this not because we are people that are lacking hearts, but precisely because we have hearts and we want to take care of our own. And I've been down to the tent cities by our lake shore. I was just yesterday in a shelter with a young, wonderful man who actually invited me there. He was on Twitter and he lives in a shelter and he said, Faith, I'm voting for you. You're the only one who's talking to me. So come on down and see how the other side lives. Well, I've seen it, Dan, and it ain't pretty. There's a lot of places where we could be parking our bucks with our own. There was a gentleman who worked at BlackBerry who was in the shelter. A gentleman who was a TDSB teacher previous to this, a gentleman who was special forces within our military that are sleeping on cots, some of them very young, already getting sciatica because it's so uncomfortable and the poor state of these cots. I want those Toronto taxpayers who, yes, are going through a rough patch to have access to the sorts of social benefits that they've paid into for all their lives, not, frankly, the world over. As my mother taught me from a very young age, you take care of your own backyard before you go out and try to save the world. And so outside of that, affordable housing has become a figment of everyone's imagination in this city. So I want to do some things around making housing, not just rentals, because I've been reading the reports, and millennials like myself, we don't want to be renting forever. We want to own our houses. So that's where my platform really is targeted, is helping making home ownership easier, especially for millennials who are born within the Toronto, Ontario, really Canadian landscape. So one thing that we're looking at doing is eliminating the land transfer tax altogether. So what that is going to translate to is tens of thousands of dollars back in the pockets of first-time home buyers. And outside of that, final point, there's lots and lots and lots that you can see at faithfortoronto.ca, but we're gonna bring drivers back into the equation, Dan, because we all talk a lot about bikers and bike lanes, and God bless them, but you know, I don't think that this business of Toronto mayor is actually that sophisticated. I don't think that anyone's asking us to solve so-called climate change or find peace in the Middle East. Just make sure that my car doesn't fall into a bloody, a sinkhole every time I'm just trying to, get my commute back into to and fro work. So we're not going to build a single bike lane until every pothole is fixed. And those potholes will be fixed using higher quality asphalt, so we don't have to do it all over again in 12 months. So like I said, I'd really encourage people to go to faithfortoronto.ca, because we've got a lot of other interesting stuff there, including a face mask ban, this heritage protection plan, defunding of non-inclusive parades, and a lot of other extremist audit as well for course, any sort of religious institutions that have known ties to terrorism or are found to be preaching violence against identifiable groups. So there's a lot of stuff there, which to me is just common sense. And I'm not the only one. Everyone that I've presented this platform to, Dan, is loving it. They say, finally, someone who is no nonsense, who knows what it takes to get this city back on track. And that's exactly what we're going to do on October 22nd. I hope and I pray that everyone comes out and votes for me. And because there's this media blackout, thanks to Press for Truth, by the way, for helping combat some of that. But I hope that everyone understands this is grassroots. And so we need everyone to go out there, tell 5, 10, 15, 20 of your friends, this is going on. This is when you vote. And this is who you should support.
All right. Well, I think your campaign is certainly going to resonate with a lot of Torontonians who are feeling that these are exactly the changes that need to take place. So I think people are going to be excited about that. I encourage them to check all the links located in the description below. Faith Goldy, once again, thank you very much, and good luck on your campaign.
You're the best, Dan. Thank you.
We all want truth. The truth will set you free.